Good morning. I'm Dani Otto from the Land Rehabilitation Society of Southern Africa. Welcome. Thank you for making the time. We're going to have a quick introduction just now. We'll give it another minute or so. People are still joining. We're at 45 and we're expecting about 115 people. But welcome for now. We're going to give it a minute or so, then I'll do an introduction. I'll introduce our guest speaker, Professor James Blignaut. And I think you should be able to see the topic on the screen. But I'll give a quick introduction on LARSA, on the topic and agriculture in general and with restoration, and then we'll give you a background on Professor James Blignaut, and then we'll get right into it. Just going to give it another minute or so. We'll look at the numbers as we go. We'll also be recording the meeting. The meeting's already being recorded just for record purposes, and often people ask to share afterwards, or people are out of country or not available and ask to be able to look at the recording afterwards. Two minutes after 9, so I think I'm going to start with the introduction. That also gives people opportunity to join in the meantime. And yes, please, if I can't see your hand, see there's already a request to share afterwards. If I can't see your hand or the comments, or if the speaker can't talk, can't see, we will give you an opportunity. I think just for the purposes of the presentation and time, let's have Professor James do his presentation, then we'll have questions and answers afterwards. Thank you. I see Johan McDonald there from Palabora has asked that we share. We will share. Thanks, Johan. So just from our side, the Land Rehabilitation Society of Southern Africa is a non-profit organization and a non-profit company. We've been around almost 15 years now. And the intention is that we're a platform, a forum for the different sectors of the industry to get together, to share information and to learn from each other. So when I say the industry, it is industry themselves, agriculture, mining, academia, very specifically as well, government and non-government organizations. So as I said, the intention is to have a platform to give these opportunities that we can share and learn from each other. There are other links to the IFC and United Nations as well, where we see fit. They've used us in the past for training purposes. They brought 60 people here a month or 3 ago from 20 different countries to come and look at rehabilitation and how things are done. And we've been invited to go to Germany to go and tell them about how we're doing rehabilitation on this side and restoration and how we fight desertification and so on. So yeah, just the bigger picture there. For the topic today, food security, that's a very hot topic and a very important thing. It's stating the obvious, but let's look at it from that perspective. Climate change affecting restoration and rehabilitation and agriculture, ongoing, and then tariffs at the moment, a hot topic, very important. It affects our economy, it affects our agriculture in the sub-region. And at the moment, the economy is dry. The agriculture is driving the economies of most of the countries in Southern Africa, but specifically in South Africa, a big drive for our economy at the moment, and a big thing. And when we're talking economy, we talk to economists. So to introduce Professor James Blignaut, he is an environmental resource economist, and he's going to talk to us today about the topic you can see on your screen. He's affiliated to University of Stellenbosch, to Sion, and he's a director of a company as well. And he's got more than 130 publications to his name that have been peer-reviewed, and we're privileged to have him here today, and thank you very much for making the time. Just a last thought as we go into the topic, there are billions in rehabilitation funds available, and who better to talk to us and give us insight in this regard, and the topic of whether restoration fits in the economics of restoration and rehabilitation. Thank you very much again, James. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dani, and thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this topic on economics of restoration, and then specifically to celebrate action and what some of our restoration heroes are already doing and what they've already achieved. And so what I'm going to do is to start sort of with a very big picture, and then funnel it down to a number of case studies and celebrate then the results of what our restorative, regenerative farmers have actually been able to achieve. And because there's nothing that excites and entices success and other people to start to on this journey of restoration than success. And so I'm going to share a couple of those success stories. So again, thank you to Larsa for this opportunity, and it's really a great honor. I must start off by saying also that this presentation is the culmination of many people that has been worked together on this subject for the past number of years, even decades. So it's trying to bring all of those different perspectives and thoughts together. But so let's start by saying that we truly can celebrate a beautiful world that we live in. I'm just going to switch off my camera from a bandwidth perspective, but it is not a bot that is talking, it is truly me. When I'm starting to talk nonsense, that will be when the bot takes over. So we start off by saying that it is an absolutely beautiful world that we live in. It's a world that is priceless and highly valuable simultaneously. The environment within which we live, the entire creation is a water filter at work. It's the home to life at work. It's a food engine and food security, as you've mentioned, at work. It's a carbon sponge at work. It's a nutrient factory at work. It's a biogenic machine at work. Can we just stand still and marvel at this incredible beauty that is around us? Sadly, however, there is another side to it as well. A very sad world, a tragic world, a broken world, and it's management-induced degradation. Management-induced degradation. And suddenly, this sponge that we have that absorbs carbon, life, nutrients, have been turned into a leaking sieve, leaking soil, leaking carbon, leaking water, leaking nutrients, leaking life, leaking money, leaking economic development opportunities. And it is lying, and it provides with a landscape of devastation, skeletons, which is impoverishing not just the environment, but every single person on earth as well. So what future do we wish for ourselves? A sponge or a sieve? It's us to decide. Do we want a sponge that supports life, or a sieve that leaks life? And that's the story of rehabilitation and restoration, is to say we want to have a future for ourselves that's a sponge, where you can actually absorb the water, absorb the nutrients, absorb the carbon, absorb the life, and regenerate life. We don't want a future that is a sieve, and a continuous sieve that's just leaking money and leaking opportunities. So that's why we have this cry for restoration. But our world today is leaking life. The Global Living Planet Index of the WWF, and it's actually been developed by the Institute of Zoology of the Zoological Society in London, illustrates this in a very clear manner. This Living Planet Index is measuring the state of the world's biological diversity based on population trends and of vertebrate species using either population size, density, and abundance, and is monitoring 5,500 species over about 42,000 populations. And it has linked it, measuring it from 1970 as the base, 1970 taken as one, and to see what is happening with these populations over time. We've lost 73%. The graph is on a quadratic scale, a logarithmic scale, sorry. And so we've leaked 73% thereof. There's 27% left. Sadly to say, this is in the lifetime of many of us sitting on this around this course, certainly in my lifetime, and many other people's lifetimes, that we've lost this. So we can fix this. Probably we must say we must fix this and turn this around. There's just no question about it. But the question is, where are the resources going to? I mean, if there's leaking this life and this resources, so where is it going to? And it is going to 1% of the global population that has got about half of the world's wealth, 45.8% of the world's wealth. what we are seeing is a massive redistribution, a substitution of natural capital for financial capital. This leaking of natural resources, one way or another, is being channeled into money. So you've got this substitution of natural capital for financial capital, as if we can eat money. In the meantime, there's this 55% of the global population that sits here with only 1% of the global wealth. So a massive redistribution. And sadly, it is the people who used to have the resources, which is now degraded, where the money goes into this 1.1% of the world's wealthy, and this massive substitution effect. So the question is, where do the rich live? Well, this very big triangle here at the corner, which you can hardly see, that's the entire Africa. So clearly the rich is not in Africa. China, America, and Germany and Europe over there. That's where the wealth is being distributed to. So let's just ask question one level further. So where does this money then actually are going to? This is where the people are sitting and living, where the money is going to. But what does it pay for? If you look at the land cover map of the world, urban society is 0.2% of the world. If you take all the concrete and you put it together in one place, it will be 0.2% of the terrestrial land use. So all that money and all the resources are flowing to 0.2% of the terrestrial land use, the global land use map, from a global land use map. That is a very, very scary situation where all the global resources are being channeled to the people who live in 0.2% of the terrestrial land space. And so we're utilizing the resources from 99.8% of the terrestrial land space to feed the economies of a 0.2% of the terrestrial land space. Something is seriously broken. Agriculture is operating mostly in the croplands and the shrublands, grasslands areas, so about 46%. There's a sketchy areas here, the bare areas and forest areas. There's some agriculture as well, but the bulk of it sits within this 46% over there. So we can truly ask the question, what on earth is going on? So there's a global transformation funnel transforming resource sponges into leaking sieves. So all these sponges and the resources from these sponges are somehow, one way or another, going through a transformation funnel, going down this funnel, generating money and economic development, so-called, on 0.2% of the terrestrial land space, and it leaves behind a wasteland. And clearly, that is not sustainable. Clearly, that cannot proceed. And it's in that space that restoration, rehabilitation plays a massive role. And what Dani has said in the introduction as well. Because clearly this needs to be turned around because it cannot continue. But since we've mentioned agriculture and the whole question around food security, what is the size of agriculture? Globally, agriculture is around 4% of GDP. It is the smallest economic sector, operating at extremely small margins, but it has the biggest land mass to manage, while it provides food that allows people to think. So if you take all the farmers on this small economy, it's only 4% of GDP, they've got the responsibility of managing this massive landmass area, where all the rest of the value of the money, all the other GDP, sits on the 0.2%. So if you can just think for yourselves, so if we only have 4% of GDP, but we have to manage and take care of 46% of the global terrestrial landmass area, isn't there an inequity here? How can the farmers and agriculture be made responsible for managing 46% of the global landmass on a 4% GDP, where the bulk of the money sits on 0.2% of the landmass in the urban areas? Hoarding money there. There's a clearly massive hidden inequity which cannot proceed and cannot survive and should change. And that's in that space that this whole idea of regeneration and regenerative agriculture speaks in. Regeneration is a process which allows for the regrowth of biological life, and the regrowth of that biological life stimulates further life and the whole process of biogenesis, which leads to renewal through an increase in system-wide net fertility flows. And how it works, it's pretty simple. Pushing energy and life into the soils using freely available sunlight, freely available rain and water, and management that's priceless. Combining those three principles, those three energy flows, you can actually regenerate the system. Take freely available sunlight, freely available rainwater, and priceless management, and push that energy and that water back into the soil, stop the leaks, and then change the soil into becoming sponges. And whilst it becomes sponges, absorbing nutrients, absorbing the water through biogenesis, you can actually start to build carbon, build nutrients, build the soil microbial action, and the entire food chain from there. So there's this great disconnect where money sleeps where the solutions are not. Money sleeps in cities, but the solutions are not there. Unfortunately, the people living here are dictating to the people living here about sustainability. Just think about that for a moment. People living in cities, where all the money sits, are dictating to people living here about sustainability. And think about how the justice in that. And while this war of words is raging, nature is leaking life. But agriculture holds the solution to many of these environmental ills that we have. Ills that we don't have to talk away. They're real, they're grandiose, but agriculture holds the key in changing and flipping that around to the better for everybody, also those that live in cities. So let's just contemplate a restored world for a moment. In words of Herman Daly, in an article that we have written some years ago, he said, and Herman Daly is the founder of basically our subject matter, ecological economics. More and more, the complementary factor in short supply, or the limiting factor, is remaining natural capital, not man-made capital as it used to be. For example, populations of fish, not fishing boats, limit fish catch worldwide. The economic logic says to invest in the limiting factor. That logic has not changed, but the identity of the limiting factor has. Let's think about the implications of what is of this. So there's a limiting factor to economic development, and the economic logic says you invest in the limiting factor. You have to augment and expand and extend that limiting factor if you want to see development going forward. The limiting factor is remaining natural capital, not man-made capital, as it used to be in years past. So the limiting factor is the population of fish, not fishing boats. We've got enough fishing boats. We've got enough manufactured capital. The question is, do we have populations of fish? And it is in this sort of idiom that restoration plays in. Let's develop the populations of fish. Or then in the regenerative agriculture, soil health, soil and the resilience of the system, etc. It has got various different applications within different contexts. Within mining world, it will have a different meaning. Within agriculture, it will have a different context. Within the marine space, it will mean something else. But the principle remains the same. There's a limiting factor to economic development. That is natural capital, no longer financial capital. that monetary financial capital just sits at a different place. It sits in the cities. It doesn't sit where the solutions are, which is in the rural areas. As Dion has mentioned, we have a large number of papers that we've written on the topic of benefits of investing in ecosystem services over the years, both in rural areas as well as in urban areas, as well as for South Africa. And what became very apparent by scrutinizing more than 1,000 studies is that restoration pays. So looking at more than 1,000 studies from a global data set, the benefit cost ratios of restoration are just absolutely outstanding. I mean, it beats most other investment forms. It ranges between a 2-to-1 to 35-to-1. Meaning 2 rand invested, 1 rand invested will give you 2 rands of benefits. 1 rand invested will give you 35 rand of benefits. So it's really a big investment site. With that's using the global data sets. Restoration pays in South Africa as well, where we have analyzed all known studies, all studies that has been published in the peer-reviewed literature that we have scrutinized. Thicket benefit studies 6, cost studies 11, and so in the parenthesis the number of studies are indicated with the B is the benefits and the C's are the costs. So benefit studies that's looking at fynbos 17 and 58 on the costs. Overwhelming positive, except for the grasslands, and in the grasslands the advantages or the benefits of livestock has not been included, and obviously the moment that you start to include livestock here, this changes around. And fynbos also is a very difficult ecosystem to operate in, and a very long time periods for recovery. But overall, very beneficial to invest in restoration. However, these economic benefits build society's wealth balance sheet. It's not immediate cash in the bank. They don't, it's monopoly money if you really want to think of it. It's economic value, it's not financial value. It excites us as economists, it doesn't excite the chartered accountants, and it doesn't pay for the groceries, and it doesn't pay for the school fees. So it invests in society's wealth balance sheet. And that's where the problem lies, is that while restoration pays in all the ecosystem services, that is the benefit of restoration, it doesn't generate an immediate cash flow. And hence that we have seen a slow uptake thereof. Yes, there might be billions of available, but what we really require is long-term, sustainable, structured in restoration. Money that flows into restoration not on an ad hoc basis or not on a grant basis, but as fundamental money, long-term, strategic, structural money. And that requires cash in the bank. And so this gives us a real big problem. Just a short detour here. Most of the data that underpins this sits in various repositories that we have developed over time. The big restoration database we haven't maintained since 2023. We probably should update it again. But on these links, most of the resources that I'm referring to, both in this presentation as well as other places, you will be able to find in these repositories that's there. So what is required is restoration that pays, and restoration that pays a cash dividend. And for that we require structural long-term investments with money at the back end to change this around. Unfortunately, that is how sad the situation has become. Just investing in it for the fact that we can show the economic benefits thereof, but if it doesn't generate money that pays for the school fees, it's not going to happen. So that brings us into the world of commerce, agriculture, mining, industry, and commerce, and say, where will we be able to source the money from in order to pay for the restoration that needs to happen? So this is basically a land use map of South Africa. mapping where the mining rights and mining activities are and prospecting rights, plus the high capable area, a land with high capability and land capability classes. And we see that there's a massive overlap here. Where the mines and the mining rights are, well, that's prime agricultural land as well. So this raises a few questions. So do we sit with a conflict, or can we sort of wrap our hands around and say, but are there not perhaps space for co-investors, and not to see it as a source of conflict in terms of the land use, but to see what co-investment possibilities are there actually and can emanate from this rather very interesting distribution of both the mining resources as well as the land with high capability. There are plenty of joint investment and equity models available for success should people and should companies and industry wish to implement them. But what it will require is a change in paradigm from a linear paradigm, which is based on an extraction-based economy, to a nature-compliant paradigm, which is based on recycling and regeneration. And this paradigm shift that where the biggest problem lies. The problem does not lie in the lack of investment models. The problem lies in a lack of paradigm, changing from a linear extraction-based mindset to a nature-compliant, recycle and regenerative mindset. Basically, what that would imply is to utilize money that is generated and channeling it into regenerative, restorative agriculture, as well as other restoration activities in order to rebuild our sponges that is so very much required. And in a sense, the answer is staring us right in the face, because what we're seeing on the screen here might look like agricultural commodities, which they are, but they're also provisioning ecosystem services. There are 4 big clusters of ecosystem services, provisioning services being one of them. And all of agriculture and the produce thereof is one of those clusters, fits into one of those clusters, namely provisioning ecosystem services. So when you buy maize, meat or vegetables, you're buying a provisioning ecosystem service. Problem is that our farms have, and the industry and the whole value chain has been geared for farms to only sell one ecosystem service, namely a crop or a commodity. Whereas the farmlands and rural areas in general are actually capable of producing a whole host of ecosystem services, the entire slew of ecosystem services. So if we invest in conservation and regenerative agriculture, a small change in terms of the effects on the land can have a big local and global impact because of the footprint thereof. If we can improve agriculture by 5%, for example, in terms of its ecosystem service benefits that it can deliver, the global impact thereof is enormous because of the footprint thereof. So invest in restoration with a monetary return, because there's money in agriculture. There's money in restoration, regenerative agriculture. It's actually providing us with real cash flow opportunities, not just economic money, but actually financial money. Plus, we're getting food security, as we've heard, system resilient, healthy food for healthier people, water flow, water quality, water quantity, carbon sequestration, climate amelioration, biodiversity, nutrient cycle that's going to be developed, etc., etc., etc. It has the capability of actually taking that graph of the WWF in terms of the, which is leaking so much, and that shows the leaking of life, standing at minus 73%. It can actually turn it around by investing in regenerative agriculture. So let's talk about agriculture and restoration then specifically. Let's be honest with ourselves that agriculture can and does have a devastating environmental impact when you allow it to be. Let's just be brutally honest about it as well. Agriculture done badly does have a very bad and a very big ecological footprint. And as a result of what has happened within agriculture, agriculture as an entire industry has become demonized and has led to this carbon derangement narrative, carbon derangement syndrome, and accusing agriculture of all things bad and evil. Yet carbon is the basic fabric of life and energy. Carbon is not our enemy. The management of our land is. Because everything around us is basically carbon-based. We live in a carbon-based society. Soil is carbon, meat is carbon, maize is carbon, vegetables is carbon. 20% of a human body is carbon. We live in a carbon society. You can actually think of the entire world as a carbon fiber sponge, because if you think of a human body, 93% of us is either oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon. It's water and carbon. Carbon is what gives us the structure to hold the water. Carbon is not the problem. The management is. So this forms of agriculture has led to a very bad sentiment around agriculture. Truth be told, though, it can be different. Regenerative agriculture looks completely different. It can be highly restorative while healing the land. And what we're looking at, for example, in these examples, is relay intercropping, where you plant oats, radish, veg in between the maize. Give that land a cover. Give the land a canopy cover. There's no more bare soils there. It covers the land. It reduces the heat buildup, and it provides a habitat for a multitude of species to flourish and to live and to build the soil carbon. You can build, even in the winter, in Clocolan, a cover crop. Plant a cover crop. Don't let the fields lay bare during winter time. Plant a cover crop. That cover crop provides habitat for a gazillion amount of bugs, bees, insects, every form of life form, while it stimulates the soil development of soil organic carbon and nutrients. Maize with cowpeas in between, planting the legumes in between, fixing the nitrogen in the soil, maintaining also, protecting that soil from heat. Planting soya with last year's cover crop, the stubble of last year, protecting the soil, providing the soil with a skin so that the soil don't leak life, don't leak water, and don't leak nutrients, protecting it. Bringing in the livestock with the saliva, the nutrients from the excrement, the nitrogen, as well as the potassium, as well as the calcium. Everything is in there within the manure, and obviously then you will build your soil life, and you won't have a sterile environment anymore. And this is a system that acts as a sponge. It does not leak life. It develops life. It grows life. So I'm going to run through a whole host of case studies here in terms of where some of our pioneer farmers have actually implemented these principles and what the results are. Starting off with cattle, and I have to acknowledge the work that Andrew Arrington and his team at Regen SA is doing, fantastic work that they are doing. So a recently published study have compared 11 farms deploying high density grazing or non-selective grazing with their neighbors, selective large scale grazing, CG. In other words, there are these 11 farmers that's applying regenerative principles, and they've compared them to their neighbors who are operating at conventional systems. 8 of the 11 high-density farmers have got much higher soil organic matter, soil organic carbon levels than their neighbors. And what it is clearly indicating is higher, and this percentages are the percentage difference relative to the neighbor. The higher the soil organic carbon difference, the higher the soil organic matter difference, as one would expect. Likewise, when we think in terms of the soil organic carbon, the percentage difference in the vegetation score, vegetation species, the richness and the diversity thereof. Non-selective grazing leads to improved vegetation score and soil carbon development. On-field and in-field evidence from one of those farms. Over time, 50% more good grazing grasses in 5 years. That's been palatable grasses that's been grown on that grazing area. 64% more grass biomass that's been generated. More than double the rainfall infiltration. 80% more indigenous legumes that's been grown and naturally returning. 60% higher botanical diversity and more than double the grazing capacity, 3 times the stocking rate. Absolutely outstanding, amazing outcomes by applying regenerative principles. And it's financially beneficial. Looking at a couple of real farmers, champion farmers, and their results. There is a South African average when you think of the profit per hectare per 100 millimeters of rain compared to the kilogram of meat produced per hectare per 100 millimeters of rain. On this axis, we see that you need money in order to stay on the farm, and you need to produce meat to stay on the farm. You have to produce meat and you need to make money. Our regenerative farmers are out there into the new galaxy that they're opening up. These are numbers that we have not thought we will ever see before them starting on this regenerative path. And you might ask the question now, operating at that sort of levels must come at an incredibly high environmental cost. How can you sustain profits of this nature and take off that amount of meat, 10 to 12 kilogram of meat per hectare per 100 mils at 130 to 250 rand per hectare per 100 millimeters of rainfall? Surely it must come at a high environmental cost. Farmer 1 relative to neighbor, it's a 50-meter fence line difference. So basically a sample has been taken 50 meters inside onto the farmer 1's land, and then 50 meters away from that, from the fence line to the other side. So the two sampling points are effectively 100 meters apart. The grazing capacity is 150% of farmer 1 to the neighbor. Now it's at 200%, but when the study has been done, when they've done the surveys, he was at 150%. But I spoke to him 2 days ago. He says, no, it's now at 200%. The soil organic carbon at 200 millimeters at 170% that of the neighbor. Vegetation score is at 85% that of the neighbor, higher than that of the neighbor. The root biomass, 81% higher than that of the neighbor. Soil organic matter, 60% higher than that of the neighbor. The bulk density is 1% more. Bulk density speaks to compaction. So with all these animals that you've got on the land, so what's the effect on the compaction, the soil compaction? The soil compaction is 1% more. This soil compaction that's 1% more is as a result of the animals, yes, but it's also the result of this increase in the root biomass. Outstanding, incredible what has been achieved. And there are substantial options for restorative co-investment. Think about it for a moment, about all the grazing lands in South Africa that's where you have sheep and cattle. It takes investment to change from a conventional system to a regenerative system. You have to change some of the lay of the land. You have to have very unique fencing systems. You have very unique watering systems. You need livestock to actually graze it. Incredible options for co-investment that sits here that can bring about these restorative effects. Let's turn to grain crops. And here I have to acknowledge the Maize Trust for the funding and the support of this work, as well as the work that Dr. Hendrik Smith and his team that they are doing. I think we should recognize this fact that conventional agriculture is in real difficulty here, crop, and I mean with respect to crops. The intermediate expenditure as a percentage of farm debt has increased from a 37% intermediate expense to farm debt to 86% of farm debt. So farm debt is going into groceries and not into capital anymore. And you can think about that for a moment. If you only buy groceries and you cannot invest in capital anymore, what is the ability to innovate? What is the ability to stay with the trends? What's the ability to risk yourselves and hedge yourselves against the dangers of the various environmental problems that we have? It's extremely marginal and it's extremely risky. That's why we have asked a question, can regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture, offer us with a risk mitigation strategy? To what extent can it offer us with a risk mitigation strategy? We therefore developed an integrated risk and resilience barometer, where we've looked at more than 100 sites over 4 years. And this integrated risk barometer looks at soil organic matter, water use efficiency, soil cover, the exposure to external costs, that is your fertilizers, your pesticides, your herbicides, and your fuel, and profitability. You have to make money in order to stay on the farm. So profitability must have a heavier score. Without making money, you can't stay on the farm. You have to make money, but then you also have to look at these things. Conservation agriculture, and the higher this indicator is, the better it is. The more resilient is the system, and the bigger the risk mitigation factor. Looking at all of these plots over the 4 years, considering the soil organic matter differences, water use efficiencies, conservation agriculture scores 74. Conventional till 12. It's a 544% difference. More in terms of resilience as well as in terms of risk mitigation that it can contribute to. While simultaneously, the percentage difference in carbon emissions compared to conventional till. So we take conventional till as our baseline, and then we looked at no-till practices as well as then conservation agriculture stroke regenerative agriculture practices. The carbon emissions from those different practices relative to conventional till. And what we can see is that while it is enhancing the system resilience and mitigating the risk, it has got an enormous effect on reducing the carbon footprint of grain crop production. But varying differences in the different production areas, and that has to do with the soil types as well as the different practices that you need to do in those specific production zones. But overall, the reductions in carbon emissions are substantial. Question is, does it make money? Because if it doesn't make money, nobody's going to do it. So we do this as an analysis based on externally verified farmer production accounts. So looking at 11 farmers in the Northwest Free State, where we've compared their performance over a period. So the average over the 2019-2020 production area, the conservation agriculture farmers have was less financially profitable. The net margins were 13% less than the conventional till guys. But after 5 years, there's a 72 percentage point swing to almost 60% better net margin in the 2022-2023 season. So what has happened is through learning, through the system healing, the farmers that's applying conservation agriculture is having a higher net margin. That's the Northwest Free State with 11 actual farmers and their production accounts. Looking at Northwest Province, 15 farmers comparing their production accounts with each other, you've got a 24% percentage point swing. They already were better than the conventional people in the 2019-2020 season, but they're now 47% better off with bigger margins in the 2022-2023 season. There's substantial options for restorative co-investment within this specific area. It takes money, it takes time to switch from conventional till to conservation agriculture. It's not happening overnight. It's not a switch that you just flip and you're at conservation agriculture. It takes time, it takes money, it takes investment, it takes resources. But there's a return on investment, and that opens massive opportunities for co-investment to actually regenerate the soils and heal the land. Let's turn to dairy. Here I have to acknowledge Milk South Africa, Dr. Heinz Meissner and his team, as well as Rihanna Reinecke, who has been instrumental in putting this together. Rihanna has done much of this work as part of her PhD, and you can go to this link for some of her work. What she has done is she has scrutinized the entire carbon flow on 12 dairy farms, looking at the dairy farms in incredible number of detail, developed a systems dynamic model with about 1,400 variables that she is monitoring and checking on these different farms. By trying to then ask the question, what is the net carbon footprint of the dairy farms? And it is through this process that we have learned the immense power, but also valuable effect of the whole concept of biogenesis. The principle of material mass balance, that principle of material mass balance, you're not going to destroy carbon. The question is not, the question is, where is the carbon? Is the carbon in the atmosphere, or is the carbon in the soil and in plants and in animals and in milk? Where's the carbon going to? And through the regenerative agriculture, you can plant that carbon in the soil, in the plants, and it has got amazing potential, as we're going to see shortly. So she has developed this, and she has written, together with several co-authors, a number of peer-reviewed publications on this, and there's some more papers in the making. But looking at the 12 farms, when you only consider the sources of emissions, then all of them have got these different levels of carbon emissions per hectare, ranging from 33,000 kilograms per hectare to 12,000 kilograms CO2 per hectare of emissions. But that's when you only consider the greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, most of the carbon debate is driven about emissions and emissions only. It does not consider the sinks, and that a farm and a cow and a sheep, they are not motor cars driving on asphalt. They're not motor cars driving on a tar road. They're animals walking on grass. And the moment that you start to introduce the sinks into the picture changes dramatically. And there's a big philosophical change that we have to make, that when you consider nature and you operate within a sheep, cattle, dairy or a livestock environment, that you are not in a factory where there's only emissions. There are also sinks at play, and we need to look at the net picture, and that is what is emerging. So what is the net? Suddenly, all but one are net already. All but one of the 12 farms are net sequestrators of carbon. So the question is, if we then put this together as a system of 12 farms, how does the picture look? Above ground biomass and the below ground biomass absorbing carbon, sequestering carbon, that's the orange ones, plus then some carbon from nitrogen fixation. But then we've got all the emissions, enteric methane, and they're all then translated into carbon equivalents through to the external emissions, leading to the net greenhouse gas emissions of 72,000 tons of carbon equivalent, which is then a net sink. You can ask the question, but how is this possible. These numbers basically can break your brain a bit. So, and it did break my brain a bit until I realized that the dairy farms are working on rotations, 8 to 13 rotations per year. So these 12 farms are in the highest productive area in the country, the best soils, the best climate, the best rainfall. And so they are grazing their fields 8 to 13 times per year. You can actually see it as a multi-story building. So let's say the farm is 1,000 hectares. If you're going to graze it 13 times, you actually have 13,000 hectares that you're grazing. You're not just grazing 1,000 hectares. You're grazing 13,000 hectares because of all the number of rotations. So the operational area is much bigger than the farm size. And that's what we've seen also with the other regenerative farmers, is they can push their rotations up. You can have more bites to the same blade each year than what the conventional person have. And the moment that you can have that, you can push the carbon sequestration capabilities tremendously. But likewise, you're pushing the production from that land. Question is, can we find somehow that this can be verified or is from a third source? You may have heard about the fact that the dairy industry within the area where these farms are have been the first recipients of the carbon credits in the agriculture area in the country. So externally verified soil carbon building, the farms are sinking carbon. And I think this has got the potential to change the narrative around tremendously. But we have to think in terms of regenerative systems. So let's just put the 12 farms on together and see how they pan out. As the environmental cost is declining as a percentage of total cost, so the kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of fat and protein corrected milk is declining, as one would expect. As the environmental cost as a percentage of profit is declining, so the kilograms of CO2 produced per large stock unit is declining. As the profit per turnover is increasing, so the environmental cost as a percentage of total cost is declining. And clearly two clusters are emerging, with the ones that where the profit is higher as a percentage of turnover leading the pack, with the areas where weaker performing farms that where the profit as a percentage of turnover is not as high, they are the farms that's also struggling from an environmental perspective. So what that basically means is that there is some evidence for double dividends, a financial and economic performance supporting each other. So as farms can reinvest the profits that they're gaining into regeneration, they also reduce their carbon footprints and their environmental footprints. And now you should pick up on the mantra. There's substantial options for restorative co-investment within the sector. There's real money to be made with real environmental benefits. And that's why when we think in terms of the environmental ills of the world, agriculture holds the key. And it's a plea that one should no longer think in terms of agriculture as the bad kid on the block, because it really offers the solutions to most of the problems that we have. Turning to the last case study, and that is the one of sheep. So with sheep, we're going to be very short, only one slide. Would like to acknowledge the International Wool and Textile Organization and Cape Wools for their support, and the team, including Paul Swan from Australia, and again Biogenesis at work. So I'm going to only the one slide. This case study from Australia, we looked at a big sheep farm, similar assessment, and asked the question, what would be the net carbon sequestration or carbon emissions from this farm if we consider the full carbon flow on this farm, including the gross primary production and not just the emissions? and it is a net sink of 8,000 tons a year. Again, the question, can we find a source to externally verify this? Unbeknown to me, when we did this work, is that this farm and the farm manager has had a very long and extensive data set of the soil organic carbon. So the actual change through the soil test that they then subsequently shared with us said that they have been able to sequester 0.8 tons of carbon per hectare in 2022 and 1.2 tons in 2023. The minus means a sequestration. In the carbon world, a minus is a good thing because that means sequestration. It's a sink, whereas a positive means that you are a source. So that is the actual numbers through the soil tests. When we convert this 8,000 and then various different scenarios that we've run that I'm not going to bother you with now, we saw that in 2022, our model estimate is either minus 0.7 or minus 0.9 for 2022. And then in 2023, minus 0.7 and minus 0.9, so slightly below the actual numbers. That obviously gave us great confidence, and we were overjoyed to see that, and the work is still under review and in various different journal papers there. Final word, final slide, with that I would like to thank you and conclude by saying agriculture offers the biggest net benefit to society in terms of life, food, water, climate amelioration, culture, recreation. The list is endless. It operates at small and declining margins with a very big responsibility to manage a very big footprint. But it serves an increasingly urbanized and affluent population. Yet it's unfortunately treated as a villain under a cloud of carbon derangement syndrome, which is totally misplaced. But with equity investment, it will act as a catalyst of positive and restorative change. It would mean restore in the limiting factor, re-energize the sponge and turn that funnel around, put the money through the funnel and reinvest in restoration. And then we can see a new future, a restorative future. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I really appreciate Dani for the opportunity and a long list of people that are co-workers, and that has made this also possible.
Thank you very much, James. That was really quite something to see. Thank you for the insight and for that specific perspective from an economic point of view, and lots of other things that we learned this morning. And thank you very much for making the time and teaching us, learning us, working with us on this. Really appreciate it. And we noticed your list there and everyone else who's made it possible. Thank you from our side. There've been some discussions already in the comments on the side. But we also open the floor for some questions. We've only got a minute or two, but you're welcome to stay on if it's possible for you. Thank you again, James. If there are any questions, otherwise I'll touch on what was said in the comments on the side. So just maybe then on the comments, yes, the discussion on restoration and, sorry, Faunus, I see your hand is up. Over to you.
Good morning, Prof. Can you hear me well? Just checking in.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. So I was curious, if we look at, you've mentioned in the last slide that, the world is becoming more affluent. So therefore, the disposable income of people will be increasing. So the assumption is that obviously demand will create price. And my question to you is whether the pricing of agricultural commodities can actually afford sustainability as we look at the existing prices in the market, and whether the cost of capital that finances the existing food supply chain can actually absorb the sustainability pricing. And then lastly, I wanted to just check, from an investor's perspective, what would be the increases in yield, of investing in more ethical sustainability practices. So there's really three questions, but all based down on whether the consumer would actually pay for ethical, sustainably produced products, and if we can then change the behavior of the 1% of people that actually consumes 90% of resources. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Farnes. So I think there's a danger here that sustainably produced or regenerative produced or produce becomes elitist. They should never be elitist. And that's where I think the problem with branding commodities around different brands and then price them differently becomes really problematic, because sustainably produced food, food that's produced healthily, should be accessible to everybody. It speaks into what Dani has mentioned initially in the introduction about food security as well. Food that's produced healthily, restoring the land, can never ever become elitist. It must serve everybody on this planet. The farmers that are actually producing the profits at the moment and that are making real returns at the moment are doing so within the current market conditions. It does take time to change. It does take capital to change. There's no questions about it, and let's not try to sugarcoat around that. And that's why individual farmers on an individual piece of property finds it very difficult to make the changes, and that's why it needs a bigger group of people. It needs equity investment. It needs structural changes in terms of the type of investments in order to make those changes. But we cannot sit with a situation with differentiated prices, where only the affluent then can buy food that is produced sustainably. I mean, then the inequity is just going to persist and become more prevalent, and become even more dangerous. So we need a different financing strategy in order to get the money where it belongs in terms of regenerative agriculture space. But as I've said, and repeating myself here in a sense, that the farmers that are producing already, they're already operating at the current margins, and they're making a buck. And just perhaps a last thought on it. Once you have gone through the adaptation process, you're utilizing less fuel and less fertilizers and less chemicals. It actually becomes cheaper to produce the commodities. Yes, there's initial adaptation process, no question about it. But if we've seen the carbon footprint of the regenerative agriculture once, the graph that I've shown. So that means less energy is required on those farms, which means less money is required. So it needs capital investment, different financing mechanisms, but not a different pricing strategy.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Farnes. Again, interesting debate. Just one or two topics to touch on as per the comments as they came up during the discussion. Remediation versus rehabilitation, and mining doing rehabilitation and not remediation. Agreed, specifically on tailings areas. There may be other areas where there is remediation, but it was interesting to see the overlap, and specifically that line, the east-west line for South Africa on the mining and overlap with the agricultural activities. And it is something we have to manage and look forward to and look into, and part of the discussion and the interest of getting the different sectors together and making things work. The other side was commercializing the regenerative agriculture, and just a caution there that we need to, just caution. I'm sure there will be people that get on the bandwagon and take it too far, but I think we've seen some really good examples and some really good statistics during the talk. Thanks, Pete. Over to you.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Prof, for a very informing talk. The heading was opportunities in post-mining agricultural landscapes. I would just like to understand a little better how the mining link works in what was presented. Is the suggestion that regenerative agriculture should be practiced on rehabilitated mining lands, or is it more for the co-investment that mines should invest off-site in these practices and then try to get some sort of carbon credit payback on it?
Well, I suppose it's both. It both can happen. In terms of the utilizing regenerative agriculture on mining lands, where it can be part of the reclamation, but also the restoration process, depending the state of it and what is required, but then also co-investment. The co-investment portion is not necessarily linked only to carbon credits. There might be a small component thereof, but I would think it will be a relatively small component. You can actually become part of yielding it of the top line itself in terms of how you invest and what structure has been utilized to invest in agriculture. So what I was trying to communicate is that there's ample investment opportunities within the existing agriculture space, which will render a bottom line return, but it requires capital investment to do so. And that return is the carbon component thereof, we haven't even factored in. None of these numbers that I've shown has got any carbon credits component factored in. They are just bottom line numbers. And the industry can actually co-invest in that and assist and help the farmers to make this change, to help the farmers to adopt the regenerative practices and obviously apply it on their own mining lands. And that's why I was trying to communicate that where you traditionally mining and agriculture has been seen as in conflict with one another because of the overlap of the land use, as Dani has referred to. But what about being co-investors? And diffuse the situation. A few years back, we did some work with the mining industry as well as with organized agriculture, and to see what possibilities there are. And there's massive possibilities of actually a synergy of forces and collaborating and not fighting each other. The world is too small for fighting. We need action now, and we try to celebrate that action.
Thank you. Sally, there's a hand up from Sally.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the quite an amazing, informative presentation, Dr. Blignot. I think my question sort of carries or piggybacks onto the last comment, is that I fully understand the benefits of regenerative farming, but in terms of, as I said, the topic of the heading of the presentation was the economics of restoration and the opportunities in post-mining agricultural landscapes. But considering that every plant has the capability and capacity to phytoextract, and the residual minerals and the elements that are sort of left over after mining, how does this impact on crop production and sort of the vegetation that the animals are eating? Because surely they end up with some sort of toxicity from the minerals and the elements. Thank you.
Everything is a stage process within the regenerative agriculture and conservation agriculture and so on, as well as in other work that we've done on the rehabilitation. We always saw that it has to go through a phased approaches without losing the end in mind out of sight. So we have to set our goal in terms of where we would like to be. and then work towards that. So whatever is required in order to heal the land from whatever possible toxic minerals, metals might be available, substrates there might be, in order then to heal that specific tract of land, in order to work towards either crop production or livestock. So it will go through stages. And we've seen that also in the utilizing even from a monocrop going to a fully fledged regenerative land space. It's not overnight. You have to go through various different stages in order to nurture the land towards that end goal. Some of the pictures that I've shown in terms of the regenerative success stories, it has taken the farmers a number of years in getting there. It does not happen overnight. And likewise, even in a toxic environment, it might even take longer there. But it goes without saying that the more toxic a specific land parcel is, the more that healing is required, and the more we have to deliver, focus our attention on that healing, because that toxicity will, at some point in time, I would imagine, land up in some form of a water course, if it is a soluble or if it leaches. So stages, but keep the end in mind.
Yeah, I think a very important topic, Albert, sorry, I'll get to you now. Very important topic on the accumulation and hyperaccumulation of metals specifically. I've worked on it myself extensively, and yeah, we've got some topics coming up at our conference on it. So look forward to further debate on it. Thanks, Albert. Question from you?
Yes. In terms of the previous question on rehabilitated land versus other land that's available at the mines, mines often have quite extensive land that's not being rehabilitated. That's old farmland and so on. And if you look at the carbon footprint and carbon offsetting, those to get those other land, the old lands or farmland, into good productive systems, specifically more regenerative agriculture, you can offset quite a lot of the very low carbon capturing potential, even the carbon emissions. So in terms of carbon offsetting, in terms of the overall carbon footprint, the inclusion of and the effective use and productivity of the old farmlands really starts to get crucial. We see quite often that biomass production and so on, and even the fertilizer application rates for plantation are very high in biomass production, and yields are very low, and that can be offset by the old lands next to these rehabilitated lands. Thank you.
Thanks, Albert, and we look forward to hearing about your...
Yeah.
Sorry, James, over to you.
I fully agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, Albert, and we look forward to hearing more about your carbon model at the conference. I saw your abstract, very interesting. Thank you again, James. I don't see any further hands. I think we've touched on the comments on the side. Gwen?
Thanks, Donnie, and thank you so much to our presenter, Prof. It's wonderful to receive this work. I think it highlights for me the importance of the Larsa community, the land rehabilitation community in Southern Africa, and how much there is to learn and cross-pollinate between, I want to say, all the unusual players. While mining is strongly featured in the title of today's presentation, I can just see so much application for this in the rehabilitation of our catchments, where we've got huge numbers of people making marginal livelihoods of very fast degradation. I mean, just washing away of the Eastern Cape is a prime example of some of the trouble we're in. So I think, having been on a tech tour to the Larsa tech tour to Namibia to go and have a look at the work being done by B2Gold, just highlights me the value of that holistic approach to the land use management underneath the control of mines and of communities as well. So I think it's just critical that we take an integrative approach, and this is why I think Larsa is such an important platform, bringing together the silos of different disciplines and opening up the debate. So thank you so much for sharing with us, Donnie. Thank you so much for helping us out today. And I look forward to seeing where this body of work goes. We will be in touch.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you again, James. There's from Prof. Klaus on the side, there's a question on what are the management principles to change to regenerative conservation agriculture, please, James.
Yeah, there are a few principles. So it is about keeping a root in the soil year round. So try and focus on making sure that there's always a root in the ground. So that you don't have barren soils for extensive periods of time. So once you take off, let's say, a cash crop, put in a cover crop so that there's always roots in the soil. It's the roots that brings the magic in the soil. Then it is to have crop rotation so that you don't have same crop every single year. Crop diversity, so bring in the diverse number of different species. Then you have to bring in animals and animal introduction into it as well. The livestock introduction is a big component because of the bacteria that's in the rumen, and that comes through in the excrement that sort of acts as the kickstarter of the soil biological life. And if we see the magic happens is this interplay between the excrement, both the manure and the urine, as well as provides us with the energy, the food for the microbes and get the soil soil restoration process started. So get us and need to have the roots in there, need to have that diversity in there, need to rotate the crops, and need to have the animals. But in all, probably the biggest one is the paradigm change. Paradigm change that leads us from a linear thinking to cyclical thinking, to a recycling thinking, to from an extraction-based mindset to a support of the sponge mindset. And once a person, a farmer, a miner, anybody has made that sort of switch, then those principles can be applied basically in all landscapes. It's not a recipe. There's principles, and you ask the right question. There are principles. How it is applied in the different contexts might vary, but the principles are basically the same. Get the roots in there, get the canopy cover, get the animals in there to bring us the manure and the microbes, and bring in the diversity as quick and as fast as possible.
Thank you, James. Hendrik Rankis, I hope we've answered your question there. I think it was along the lines of what we've just discussed. Please shout or put another comment in if there are further questions there, Hendrik. James, I just wanted to check. So the tilling, the ploughing, or the reduction of it, is it a big thing?
Yeah, and it is by switching from deep tillage to a no-till has got a big effect because of, well, on the fuel side, obviously, because it's much lighter on the fuel, as well as it's much lighter on the capital. You can use smaller tractors and you can use them for longer than when you operate very heavy, big machines. I mean, the wear and tear is so much bigger. But in terms of the soil, you would like to build the community of life in the soil, and by bringing in the big tillage each time, you break up all this the soil community, the community of life that you're trying to build in the soil. So you try to have minimum soil disturbance. Yeah, that was, sorry, I forgot that principle. Thank you for asking that. I forgot that principle of minimal soil disturbance, which is, I think, what you're alluding to. So that is part of the answer to Klaus's questions, minimum soil disturbance. So no tillage. You want to, once you've got your mycorrhiza and your rhizobium going, and once you've got your population of nunus alive and active, they're your free agents. You don't want to kill them. You want to actually give them food. So all those nunus that's in the soil, give them as much manure from the cattle and the sheep as possible, so that they can actually act as our energy agents to feed the plants.
Thank you, James. Gustav, welcome. You've got your hand up. We look forward to your questions. You're also very actively involved in this regard. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to know, saying no-till in a mining situation where most of the problems are actually related to soil compaction, hard setting, surface crusting. I hear what you're saying. There's a biological answer. Yeah, I think it requires a more integrated approach of physical, chemical, and biological, and not just saying biology will answer all of the questions. I think it can definitely answer the majority of them. Definitely agree with that. But to say it's in all climates, all types, regenerative agriculture is the only method. I don't agree. And then there's many examples where holistic management has actually failed. And
Yeah.
I don't think those were referenced.
Yeah, I hear what you say, Gustav, and you're right there. And again, a phased approach, and in many instances where you have, let's say, you start with a plow bank, due to practices in the past, you will start with a rip. You won't. I mean, again, you don't. It's a phased process. So in many of the farmers actually had to start with a very deep rip in order to break up the plow banks and to make the soil workable. And that's why there's quite a time period of adjustment for the very reasons that you have mentioned. And sometimes we're getting too hasty with it. We're not going to turn around the negative effects of, let's say, 40 or 50 years of bad practices in one season. It's going to take a time to change that around. So if you've had X number of years of very heavy soil disturbance, it's going to take time to restore that. And as I've said, it might even take a rip or two for that in that process. When I mentioned the principles, that does not mean that I've also said that it's not a recipe, that you don't start out with it immediately. There might be cases that you have to follow other practices, but you must always try to keep the end in mind, where you would like to be. And then it might be different pathways of getting there. And it might include a rip. And I've got no problem with mechanical interventions if to start off the process. But that's not where we want to stay. We want to get to another stage and build it up structurally in a phased way to that point. But I fully agree with you that in some cases it might need very heavy equipment and even chemical to balance the land for you to go forward. But we cannot lose sight of where we want to be.
Thank you, James. Thanks, Gustav. Albert, I see your hand. Just a sec. We've got some examples. If you know Fultana, Dr. Fultana, he's got his presentation where they brought in like extra large dozers to rip rehabilitated land at certain depths. We've got different presentations on YouTube as well. A lot of work on the rehabilitation side, mining side, and also on the agricultural side, where you can see how test pits have been dug up and how they look at the depth of ripping, the depth of ploughing, the depth of the tillage. So a very interesting debate and different soil types, different cases, but agree with Gustav, we often in the rehabilitation side end up with soil that's been compacted repeatedly, hopefully only once, but it is a bit major challenge. Albert, thanks to you. Over to you.
Yes, I have two questions. But first of all, comment. I think the practices on the old lands are much more optimistic, optimized. At the rehabilitated land, I think the biggest focus should be on vegetation of grasses with very strong and well-developed roots. I think in terms of soil health and creating the physical process, structures and so on, also carbon sequestration, roots become, I think it's a key player at rehabilitated land with more degraded physical properties and low carbon and all those type of things. So the two questions is, I suspect that the J curve for old land that is now being put in production will differ from that of rehabilitated land. And that's the first question. So will the J curve on rehabilitated land, I guess it's going to be much longer. Will that J curve eventually get up with rehabilitated land? Will we ever get to a quality of rehabilitated land that we will start getting profit? So that's the first question. And second question is, should rehabilitation be included in this economics of the land use, for instance? Should that be treated different? Because I think the economics about the rehabilitation of land is massively high cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. So just perhaps for everybody's sake, the J curve is also called an investment cost curve. So it speaks into the idea that you before and with any investment, there's a capital outlay, whereby there's a capital outflow, in other words, a downward slope, but you have this capital outlay component so that you can actually have an upside over the longer period of time. So the investment curve, or also called a spoon curve sometimes, or then the J curve as it's commonly known, is applicable to all forms of investment, not just to agriculture, not just to regenerative agriculture. It applies in mining, it applies in a domestic space as well. If you want to buy something, there's an outflow, and you do that with the expectation of a return in the longer run, and hence the naming of the J curve. And so your question is around the shape of the J curve. It's not possible to say what that exact number of years will be, given the massive differences in the context. But what I can say is what we have found is that the more a land is degraded, the deeper that investment J curve is. So the more money you need, and the more arid an environment is, the longer that tail is. So the more arid, the longer the tail is before you see an upswing. You need water. You need water and sun, not just the one. You need water and sun. So the more arid it is, the longer that tail is, and the more that level of degradation is, the deeper it is, the more money you need. So that is sort of the two trends that we are seeing, or sort of two ideas that is emerging. So it's solely going to depend on the degree of degradation that you're talking about. Some of the lands that Gustav and others have referred to, which are very heavily degraded lands coming out of seriously destructive activities, you're going to need more money to restore it, and it will take longer to do so. The second question was then around the economics of rehabilitation. I think what is sadly happening is that the economics of rehabilitation is treated only as a cost side. It's like farming, you only consider it on the emissions. And farming, there's emissions and there's sinks and sources. And with rehabilitation and restoration, you've got expenses, but you've also got returns. And the narrative around restoration, rehabilitation should also start to take the return side into account, because I think the moment that it starts to take the return side into account, it will also fast track the process of investment. We cannot just ask, what is going to cost me? You need to ask the question, what are we going to get from this investment? And there are two different forms of returns. There's the economic return, which is non-cash based, but then there's also the cash-based return, which, as I've alluded to. And we really need a debate, a discussion, an acceleration of the focus on in terms of that latter component. And hopefully through Lasha and the discussions around the economics of restoration and rehabilitation, there can also be a focus on the return side.
Thank you. Thanks, Virj. It's 10:30. If there's anything else, we can still spend a minute or two. But James, thank you very much again from our side. It's been a really interesting discussion, some really interesting facts and trends and graphs seen there. I've certainly learned a lot in terms of the carbon side of things from the agricultural side. As you said, it's been made a villain in some circles in some regards, which is fascinating to see at least a counter conversation there. If there's nothing further, thank you again. It really is a good insight, and we hope to have you on board again soon. And it's good to see the information. Thank you. If there's nothing further, we're going to close the meeting.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you for the opportunity. It was, I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for making the time. And I think with that, till the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.